Welcome to Truth Report. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the forces reshaping how people move, live, and survive across borders. From the roads of America to the halls of Westminster, from Bangkok's backstreets to California's bike lanes, the stories we've uncovered today reveal a world where immigration policy is being rewritten in places you'd never expect.
We've got 5 stories tonight that on the surface look completely unrelated. A car article, a quirky police arrest in Thailand, an e-bike bill in California, and a searing opinion piece from Al Jazeera about Britain's healthcare system. But dig deeper, and they all converge on a single question: who gets to belong, who gets to move freely, and who profits from keeping people in place?
We'll show you how the automotive industry's slow-motion collapse mirrors the economic pressures driving migration, how license plate laws target vulnerable communities, and how the scapegoating of migrants in the UK's NHS crisis is one of the most dangerous lies being told in Western politics right now.
We're also going to Bangkok, where a police operation disguised as a Lunar New Year celebration raises serious questions about surveillance, cultural appropriation by state authorities, and how law enforcement treats migrant communities versus locals. It's a story everyone's laughing about, but the implications run deep.
Buckle in. This is Truth Report, and tonight, we follow the money, the power, and the people caught in between. Our first story comes from CleanTechnica, and at first glance, it looks like it belongs on a car enthusiast blog, not an immigration broadcast. The headline reads, "Mechanical reality is catching up to ICE pickups." The article documents how internal combustion engine pickup trucks, the backbone of working America, are becoming mechanically and economically unsustainable compared to their electric counterparts.
The author launched a project called Charge to the Parks to demonstrate that electric vehicles can handle the most remote terrain in the United States. But the deeper story here isn't about horsepower or torque. It's about the economic reality facing millions of working-class Americans, including the immigrant workers who depend on these vehicles for their livelihoods.
Think about who drives pickup trucks for work in this country. Construction crews, landscapers, agricultural workers, delivery drivers. A massive proportion of those workers are immigrants, many undocumented, working in industries that literally build and feed America. When the cost of maintaining an ICE pickup skyrockets, with transmission failures, engine rebuilds, fuel costs, it's these workers who get crushed first.
And the numbers are staggering. A modern ICE pickup has thousands of moving parts. An electric truck has a fraction of that. The maintenance costs alone can run thousands of dollars per year more for combustion vehicles. For a day labor or a small landscaping crew run by immigrants, that's the difference between staying solvent and going under.
Here's where the immigration angle gets really sharp. The automotive industry has been lobbying for decades to keep the combustion engine dominant. That same industry relies heavily on immigrant labor in its manufacturing plants, particularly in states like Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. These workers build the very trucks they can barely afford to maintain.
It's a vicious cycle. Immigrant workers manufacture vehicles at suppressed wages, then those same workers need affordable transportation to get to job sites in agriculture, construction, and service industries. As ICE vehicles become less reliable and more expensive, these communities face a transportation crisis that directly threatens their economic survival and, by extension, their ability to remain in the country.
And here's what nobody's talking about: the transition to electric vehicles, while necessary for climate, is being managed in a way that could devastate immigrant communities. EV tax credits often require citizenship documentation. Charging infrastructure is being built primarily in affluent, predominantly white neighborhoods. The green transition is being designed, whether intentionally or not, to exclude the very workers who need it most.
Who benefits? Major automakers who can sell expensive electric trucks to upper-middle-class buyers while continuing to dump aging, unreliable ICE models on working-class and immigrant communities. Who loses? The immigrant workforce that keeps this country running, now facing both rising vehicle costs and a green transition that's leaving them behind.
The mechanical reality catching up to ICE pickups isn't just an automotive story. It's a story about economic displacement, about an immigrant workforce being squeezed from every direction, and about how even the transition to clean energy can become a tool of exclusion if equity isn't centered in the design.
According to CleanTechnica's reporting, the simplicity and reliability advantages of electric drivetrains are becoming impossible to ignore. But until policymakers ensure that immigrant communities have equal access to this technology, the mechanical reality catching up to ICE pickups will be yet another force pushing vulnerable people to the margins.
Now we travel to Bangkok, Thailand, where a story that's gone viral across multiple international outlets reveals more than meets the eye. Both the South China Morning Post and The Guardian are reporting that Thai police donned a lion dance costume during Lunar New Year celebrations to arrest a man suspected of stealing approximately $64,000 worth of Buddhist artifacts.
On the surface, it's a charming, almost comedic story. officers dressed as a red and yellow lion danced their way through festival crowds, then pounced on an unsuspecting burglar. The suspect was accused of breaking into the home of a police superintendent in suburban Bangkok and making off with numerous Buddhist objects. But Alex, let's look at what's actually happening here beneath the entertainment value.
Absolutely. First, the cultural context. The lion dance is a Chinese tradition, deeply significant during Lunar New Year. Thailand has a substantial ethnic Chinese population, many of whom are descendants of immigrants who've been in the country for generations. For Thai police to use this cultural practice as a disguise for a law enforcement operation raises real questions about the instrumentalization of immigrant cultural traditions by the state.
That's a critical point. When state authorities co-opt the cultural practices of minority or immigrant-descended communities for policing purposes, it blurs the line between celebration and surveillance. Festival-goers in that crowd, many of them from Thai Chinese communities, were unknowingly participating in a police operation. That erodes trust between immigrant communities and law enforcement.
And consider the broader policing context in Thailand. Human rights organizations have documented extensive concerns about how Thai law enforcement interacts with migrant communities, particularly workers from Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. Thailand hosts millions of migrant workers, many in precarious legal situations, and they already face disproportionate scrutiny from police.
When a story like this goes viral, the world laughs at the clever disguise. But for migrant communities in Bangkok, the message is different. Police can be anywhere, disguised as anything, embedded in your cultural celebrations. That's not funny. That's a chilling reminder of how surveillance can permeate every aspect of daily life, especially for those without the protection of full citizenship.
It's also worth noting what was stolen: Buddhist artifacts from a police superintendent's home. This isn't a story about petty crime. It's about the theft of religious and cultural objects, which in Thailand carries enormous symbolic weight. The question is whether the theatrical arrest was about justice or about spectacle, about sending a message about who controls cultural spaces.
Who benefits? The police, who get a viral PR moment that distracts from serious criticisms of Thai law enforcement. Who loses? Immigrant and minority communities whose cultural celebrations become potential cover for state operations, and whose trust in the safety of public gatherings is further eroded.
The Guardian and the South China Morning Post both covered this as a light-hearted story. But when you understand the dynamics of immigration, policing, and cultural power in Thailand, it's anything but. It's a case study in how the state can weaponize culture while the world applauds.
And let's be clear, this pattern isn't unique to Thailand. From ICE agents arresting people outside courthouses in the United States to police operations targeting festival gatherings in Europe, the infiltration of community spaces by law enforcement disproportionately affects immigrant populations everywhere. Bangkok's lion dance arrest is a symptom of a global disease.
Turning now to California, where a newly introduced bill could fundamentally change how electric bikes are regulated, and the implications for immigrant communities are enormous. Electrek reports that the proposed legislation would require license plates for most electric bikes in the state.
On its face, this seems like a straightforward safety regulation. E-bikes have exploded in popularity, and there are legitimate concerns about speed, sidewalk safety, and accountability in accidents. But when you examine who actually rides e-bikes in California and why, this bill starts to look like something very different.
Let's talk about who depends on electric bikes in California. Food delivery workers, many of them immigrants, many undocumented. Warehouse workers commuting to distribution centers. Day laborers getting to job sites. In cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Diego, e-bikes have become the primary transportation for thousands of immigrant workers who can't afford cars, can't get driver's licenses, or live in areas with inadequate public transit.
And that's the crux of the issue. A license plate requirement means registration, which means identification, which means documentation. For undocumented immigrants, registering an e-bike could mean entering a government database. In the current political climate, with intensified immigration enforcement, that's not a bureaucratic inconvenience. That's a potential pathway to deportation.
Think about what happened with driver's licenses. When states began offering licenses to undocumented residents, it was hailed as a safety measure. But those databases have repeatedly been targeted by federal immigration authorities seeking to identify and locate undocumented people. An e-bike registration system could become the same kind of trap.
The bill's supporters argue it's about accountability and safety, and those concerns aren't baseless. E-bike accidents are rising, and hit-and-run incidents involving e-bikes are a real problem. But the question is whether a license plate mandate is proportionate, and whether its designers have considered the disproportionate impact on immigrant communities.
Who benefits from this legislation? Insurance companies, who stand to gain from mandatory e-bike registration. Law enforcement, who gain another tool for stops and identification checks. And frankly, the automobile industry, which sees e-bikes as competition for short-distance trips that would otherwise require a car.
Who loses? Immigrant delivery workers, who are already among the most exploited laborers in the gig economy. Workers who earn poverty wages delivering food for apps like DoorDash and Uber Eats, often without health insurance, and whose e-bikes are their only affordable means of transportation. A license plate requirement adds cost, adds bureaucratic burden, and adds risk.
And here's the deeper connection to immigration enforcement. California has positioned itself as a sanctuary state, pushing back against federal immigration crackdowns. But a bill like this, requiring registration and identification for a mode of transport disproportionately used by undocumented workers, undermines that sanctuary promise from within.
According to Electrek's reporting, the bill is still in its early stages. But immigrant advocacy organizations should be raising alarms now, before this becomes law. The history of seemingly neutral regulations being weaponized against immigrant communities is long and well documented. This e-bike bill fits squarely in that tradition.
It's regulation that looks like safety but functions as surveillance. And in a state with millions of undocumented residents, surveillance is never just about traffic management. It's about control, about knowing where people are, and ultimately, about who gets to move freely and who doesn't.
The e-bike has become a symbol of immigrant resilience and adaptability, a way to work, earn, and survive in a system that offers few other options. Putting a license plate on that symbol isn't just about road safety. It's about making visible a population that survives precisely because it can remain unseen by the state.
Now to our lead story tonight, and it's one that demands the full weight of investigative scrutiny. Al Jazeera has published a devastating opinion piece titled, "Migrants are not responsible for the UK's healthcare crisis." The argument is direct and backed by data. Immigrants are not a burden on the National Health Service. They are a vital part of how it functions.
This story strikes at the heart of one of the most persistent and damaging lies in Western immigration discourse, that migrants drain public services. In Britain, the NHS has become the primary battleground for this narrative, with politicians across the spectrum blaming immigration for long wait times, staff shortages, and underfunded hospitals. Al Jazeera's reporting dismantles this myth systematically.
Let's start with the numbers. The NHS would literally collapse without immigrant workers. Roughly 1 in 6 NHS staff were born outside the United Kingdom. In some specialties, the proportion is far higher. International medical graduates make up a massive share of the doctor workforce, and nurses recruited from countries like the Philippines, India, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe are the backbone of hospital wards across England.
So the people being blamed for straining the healthcare system are, in large part, the same people keeping it running. That's not irony. That's a deliberate political strategy. Scapegoating immigrants for a crisis caused by decades of government underfunding, privatization, and mismanagement is easier than admitting that successive British governments have systematically starved the NHS of resources.
And the economic data supports this completely. Multiple studies have shown that immigrants to the UK are net fiscal contributors. They pay more in taxes than they consume in public services, including healthcare. The idea that migrants are coming to Britain to exploit the NHS isn't just wrong. It's the precise opposite of reality.
Al Jazeera's piece points to the real culprits behind the NHS crisis: austerity policies that cut healthcare funding in real terms for over a decade, a failure to train enough domestic doctors and nurses, a housing crisis that drives up costs for healthcare workers, and a social care system so broken that hospital beds are blocked by patients who have nowhere else to go.
None of those problems were caused by immigration. Every single one of them was caused by policy choices made by elected officials. But blaming migrants is politically convenient because it redirects public anger away from the government and onto a vulnerable population that can't easily fight back.
And this scapegoating has real consequences. It fuels anti-immigrant violence and harassment. It makes immigrant healthcare workers feel unwelcome in the very institutions they sustain. It drives away potential recruits from abroad at a time when the NHS desperately needs more staff, not fewer. The hostile rhetoric is actively making the healthcare crisis worse.
Who benefits from blaming immigrants for the NHS crisis? Politicians who need a distraction from their own failures. Media outlets that profit from anti-immigrant outrage. And private healthcare companies that stand to gain as public confidence in the NHS erodes, companies that would love nothing more than a two-tier system where the wealthy pay for private care while the public system deteriorates.
Who loses? Everyone who depends on the NHS, which is to say, everyone in Britain. Immigrant healthcare workers who face discrimination and hostility while saving lives. And the patients, disproportionately elderly and working class, who suffer longer wait times not because of immigration, but because their government chose austerity over investment.
There's a particularly insidious dimension to this that Al Jazeera highlights. The UK actively recruits healthcare workers from developing nations, often from countries with their own severe doctor shortages. Britain benefits enormously from the training investments made by poorer countries, then turns around and allows its politicians to demonize the very workers it poached.
It's a form of neo-colonial extraction. You take the skilled labor that developing nations desperately need, you benefit from their expertise, and then you blame them for the problems caused by your own domestic policy failures. It's exploitation dressed up as immigration policy, and it's happening in plain sight.
The Al Jazeera piece makes clear that the UK's healthcare crisis is a crisis of political will, not of immigration. Until British politicians and media are held accountable for this deliberate misdirection, the NHS will continue to decline, immigrant workers will continue to be scapegoated, and the people of Britain will continue to suffer from a lie that serves no one except those in power.
And this isn't just a British problem. The same scapegoating dynamic plays out across Europe, in the United States, in Australia, wherever governments find it easier to blame newcomers than to fund public services. The migrants are draining healthcare narrative is a global playbook for politicians who have failed their own people.
Now let's connect these threads, because tonight's stories aren't isolated. They form a pattern that should alarm anyone paying attention to how immigration is being weaponized across the globe.
Start with the fundamental economics. In our first story, we saw how the decline of ICE pickup trucks threatens the livelihoods of immigrant workers who depend on affordable transportation. In our last story, we saw how immigrant healthcare workers are being blamed for a crisis they didn't create while being essential to its solution. The pattern is clear: immigrant labor is exploited when convenient and scapegoated when politically useful.
Then look at regulation and surveillance. California's e-bike license plate bill would create a new identification system that disproportionately affects undocumented workers. In Bangkok, police embedded themselves in a cultural celebration to conduct an arrest. In both cases, the state is expanding its ability to monitor and control populations, using safety and law enforcement as justification.
And underpinning all of it is the narrative war. The lie that migrants burden public services, as exposed by Al Jazeera's NHS reporting, is the same lie that justifies registration requirements for e-bikes, that justifies police operations in festival spaces, that justifies an automotive transition that excludes immigrant workers. It's the lie that says immigrants are a problem to be managed, rather than people with rights and contributions.
What we're seeing across these stories is a system designed to extract maximum value from immigrant labor while minimizing immigrant rights. Build the trucks but can't afford to drive them. Staff the hospitals but get blamed for their failures. Deliver the food but risk deportation if you register your bike. It's a machine built on exploitation.
The deeper power structure here connects corporations, governments, and media in a reinforcing loop. Corporations profit from cheap immigrant labor. Governments deflect their policy failures by blaming immigrants. Media amplifies the scapegoating because outrage drives engagement. And the cycle continues, with immigrant communities bearing the cost at every turn.
The question we have to ask is, who is designing this system, and who does it serve? Because it certainly doesn't serve the immigrant construction worker whose truck just broke down. It doesn't serve the delivery rider in Los Angeles wondering if a license plate will get her deported. And it doesn't serve the NHS nurse from Nigeria being told she's the reason grandma can't see a doctor.
It serves those who profit from division. Those who need a permanent underclass that works hard, stays quiet, and takes the blame. That is the pattern revealed by tonight's stories, and it's a pattern that will continue until we refuse to accept the lies that sustain it.
That's our broadcast for tonight. The stories we covered may have come from different continents and different contexts, but they all point to the same truth: immigration policy is not just about borders. It's about power, about who gets to profit from human labor and who gets discarded when they're no longer useful.
If you're an immigrant worker watching this, know that the data is on your side. You are not draining systems. You are building them, staffing them, and keeping them running. The people who tell you otherwise are protecting their own interests, not yours.
Challenge the narratives. Question who benefits when a new regulation targets vulnerable communities. Ask why the conversation about healthcare always lands on immigration instead of funding. Follow the money, and you'll find the truth.
Thank you for joining us on Truth Report. We'll keep digging, keep connecting the dots, and keep bringing you the stories that matter. Stay informed, stay critical, and we'll see you next time.